The final plea arrived without warning, sealed inside a plain cream envelope and carried directly into King Charles's private sitting room. Meghan was not asking for sympathy. She was asking for one last meeting, a restored place beside the family, and a carefully managed return to royal life. But Charles did not summon an aide or request more time. After reading the final page twice, he placed the letter on the table and quietly said the word Meghan had feared most. No. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles stayed in his chair. The letter asked for a reconciliation meeting, access to family events, and talks about a limited return to official royal duties. Official duties meant public work carried out on behalf of the Crown, the institution represented by the monarch and working royals. Yet he knew this was about whether broken trust could be restored without reopening every wound. William had already given his answer. The prince believed Meghan could not return through private pressure after walking away from royal responsibilities. Anne reached the same conclusion. The Princess Royal, a senior working member, warned that one exception would become a pathway to many more. A private invitation could become public proof of acceptance, while one meeting could be presented as the first step toward restoration. Meghan waited in California as a message arrived from a palace representative. She opened it expecting conditions or delay. Instead, she found finality. Charles would not meet her. He would not negotiate. He would not reconsider the separation. Her expression hardened as she read again, because the answer went beyond the present request. It declared that no future appeal for restored royal duties would be considered. William and Anne had demanded that language. The future king insisted that no hidden exceptions remain. The monarch's sister agreed there could be no private invitations, ceremonial appearances, unofficial representation, or back-channel promises waiting to revive the struggle. Charles reached for his fountain pen. He signed the final page, held it, then capped the pen. The click was small, but its meaning was enormous. The matter had moved beyond family hesitation. It had become the settled position of the Crown. Meghan believed she had sent a letter of reconciliation. William and Anne saw the final move in a longer conflict, one that had reached its point of no return during a private royal gathering months earlier. To understand why Charles rejected the plea so completely, the story must move beyond the letter and into the personal fears driving each figure toward an irreversible collision. The rejection appeared simple on paper, but nothing about the people behind it was simple. Charles feared losing his son forever. Meghan feared being erased from the royal story. William feared that one exception would expose his family to another cycle of chaos. Anne feared something even larger: the slow collapse of royal authority beneath private bargaining. Each entered the crisis carrying a different wound, and every wound demanded a different ending. Charles still saw Harry as his younger son, before he saw him as a former working royal. A working royal is a family member who performs official duties on behalf of the Crown. That distinction mattered, because rejecting Meghan's appeal could push his son even further away, while accepting it could destroy every boundary created after the Sussex departure. The king was not choosing between kindness and cruelty. He was choosing which loss he could survive. Meghan understood the stakes just as clearly. She did not want only a place at a private dinner or a quiet family gathering. She wanted formal recognition that her royal identity had not been permanently erased. The plea was her final attempt to recover influence, visibility, and a place inside the institution she had once left behind. When the answer arrived, she walked away from her phone, then returned, and read it again. The silence around negotiation hurt more than the rejection itself. William stood near the window before meeting his father, carefully controlling his anger. The prince was thinking about Catherine and their children, because renewed access could drag private family life back into public conflict. He believed one exception would become a new cycle of pressure, explanation, and exposure. The future king was not defending pride. He was defending peace. Anne entered with far less emotion, but her calm carried greater force. The Princess Royal believed royal service could not become something a person abandoned, criticized, and later reclaimed when circumstances changed. She knew the institution would lose authority if duty became negotiable whenever someone demanded another chance. Harry remained hidden behind Meghan's words, but his role was real. He had approved the central demands and hoped Charles would accept a private meeting before William or Anne could stop it. The king even considered allowing Meghan to attend one family event without official status. Charles finally asked William whether any form of reconciliation remained possible. The prince paused before saying personal forgiveness might survive, but royal restoration could not. That answer changed everything. Anne already knew why compromise had become impossible. Months earlier, Meghan had turned one private family opportunity into a demand for public restoration. That incident had remained behind closed doors, but it became the hidden trigger that transformed suspicion into a permanent royal boundary. Months before the final letter reached Charles, Meghan had been offered something few people believed possible: a private path back into the family's presence. There were no cameras, no public announcement, and no promise of restored status. It was meant to be a quiet act of mercy. Yet, before the evening ended, a single conversation changed the meaning of the invitation. William called it pressure. Anne called it manipulation. Charles called it the moment trust finally broke. Charles had authorized Meghan and Harry to attend a small family memorial reception at Windsor after they promised the evening would remain private. A memorial reception is a closed gathering held to honor someone who has died, often allowing relatives to speak away from public ceremony. The king hoped the solemn occasion would soften years of hostility and let the family meet as relatives rather than rival royal camps. Meghan entered knowing there would be no announcement, no titles discussion, and no promise of official work. Harry understood those conditions too. Yet before the evening ended, she approached Charles near the library doorway and demanded that the palace confirm her return to selected royal events before she and her husband left Britain. The palace meant the royal household and its officials, not merely a building. Her warning was blunt. Continued silence would be seen as deliberate exclusion. Charles felt the trap close around him. The king told Meghan that grief could not become the setting for negotiation, but she insisted delay had already cost her family years of recognition. He had offered mercy. She had turned mercy into leverage. William entered after hearing the argument rise. The prince told Meghan that a private family gathering could not be used to force a public concession. She accused him of controlling his father and blocking every genuine attempt at reconciliation. Harry stepped forward, then stopped, torn between defending his wife and recognizing how badly the moment had shifted. Anne heard the final exchange from the adjoining passage. The princess later repeated the substance of Meghan's warning to Charles in a documented private account prepared for the king's office. Her concern deepened when palace staff discovered that a draft statement already existed, announcing that discussions about a Sussex return were underway. William saw it as proof that the invitation had been treated as a strategic opening from the beginning. Anne stepped forward, opened the library door, and calmly said the conversation was over. Meghan left without answering. Harry followed, but looked back toward his father with anger and regret fighting across his face. Charles noticed he did not call him back. Months later, when the final plea arrived, William and Anne recognized the same demands beneath softer language. The old wound had returned in a new envelope. And this time, Charles could no longer avoid placing William, Anne, and Meghan's request on opposite sides of the same room. Charles had expected disagreement. He had not expected William and Anne to arrive with the same position, the same urgency, and the same refusal to bend behind the closed doors of the king's private office. Blood and duty collided. Charles spoke as a father who still feared losing Harry. William answered as a future king protecting his family. Anne spoke for the institution itself. By the end of the meeting, compromise had become more dangerous than rejection. Charles had summoned them before issuing any reply to Meghan. No secretaries, communications officers, or legal advisors were permitted inside. A private office meeting meant the discussion would remain personal, with no official record shaping the words before they were spoken. The king wanted honesty, but what he received was something much harder. Charles proposed a narrow compromise. He would meet Meghan and Harry privately, then consider allowing them to attend a small number of family occasions without official duties. Official duties are public responsibilities carried out on behalf of the crown. He believed a controlled opening might reduce bitterness without restoring their former status. William rejected the idea at once. The prince told his father that every private concession had eventually become public pressure. Catherine and the children had already carried the emotional cost of repeated Sussex disputes, and he would not expose them again. Anne went further. The princess warned her brother that compassion without boundaries was no longer compassion, it was permission for the same conflict to restart whenever Meghan demanded another entrance. Charles rose from his chair. The king asked whether William was truly prepared to close the door on his own brother. The future king remained standing across the desk and answered that Harry had already closed many doors himself. Now, the monarchy had to decide which ones could never be reopened. Anne then placed the earlier Windsor draft statement on the desk. The document prepared before the memorial reception announced that discussions about a Sussex return were already underway. She argued that it proved Meghan had entered that private evening expecting to create a public result. William revealed something worse. Meghan's final plea requested direct communication with his household separate from Charles's office. The prince saw it as an attempt to build another route into royal decision-making. Charles pushed his chair back and accused them of forcing him to choose between family and crown. Anne answered quietly that the choice had already been forced by those who turned family contact into institutional pressure. Silence followed. Then, Charles removed the compromise paragraph from the reply and ordered the wording changed. No royal return would be discussed now or in the future. The confrontation ended with the king's signature. But the real power of the decision would depend on who controlled every door surrounding the crown. Royal rejection is not enforced by one sentence. It is enforced through invitations that never arrive, calls that are redirected, guest lists that remain unchanged, and private promises that are no longer permitted. Once Charles signed the response, William and Anne moved beyond emotion. Their task was to turn the king's answer into an unbreakable structure, and behind the formality of palace procedure stood two people determined that Meghan would find no side entrance. William understood where real control rested. As heir to the throne, he influenced access to his household, future royal planning, and the family arrangements surrounding Catherine and their children. The heir is the person next in line to become monarch. Without the prince's cooperation, Meghan could not rebuild any official role or move close to the family's future center of power. Anne carried a different kind of authority. The princess had earned decades of trust among courtiers, charities, military representatives, and ceremonial organizers. Courtiers are senior staff who help manage royal duties and private arrangements. Her support made the rejection feel permanent because she could turn Charles's private answer into a rule understood across the entire institution. Charles watched that machinery begin. The king sat quietly while his private secretary listed the areas affected: invitations, ceremonies, household contact, family attendance, and official representation. A private secretary is the monarch's senior advisor who manages sensitive decisions and communication. His sadness deepened as Meghan and Harry stopped sounding like family names and became categories inside a system. Charles insisted on one protection. He would not allow the decision to block emergency contact or private communication with Harry. William agreed, but only if those conversations could never be used to negotiate Meghan's status. The prince wanted a line between father and son and the crown. Anne refused every softer exception. When a senior courtier suggested Meghan might attend an unofficial Christmas gathering, the princess answered that a private invitation would soon be presented as public acceptance. One exception could undo the entire decision. The rules tightened. Any future invitation involving Meghan would require approval from Charles, William, and Anne. Her representatives could no longer contact separate royal households, hoping for different answers. Every message would pass through one designated office. Anne then saw Meghan's name under possible private attendees on a future ceremony list. The princess drew one line through it, returned the page, and said the king had already answered. William reviewed the new family access arrangements without triumph. He knew the decision might cost him Harry forever, but he would not expose Catherine to more uncertainty. What had felt like a painful letter now became a sealed system, and when Meghan understood its full reach, disbelief gave way to fury. Meghan had expected Charles to resist. She had expected William to object. She had even expected Anne to demand conditions. What she had not expected was silence after the rejection. No invitation to clarify, no private message from the king, and no courtier willing to reopen negotiations. One by one, the channels she believed remained available disappeared. The final plea had not produced another round of debate. It had ended the debate, and the reality struck with brutal force.